Good evening, beautiful people. Thank you so much for being here. This is your usual hashtag Gather to Grow with Food from Mzansi on Instagram Live. And I'm so happy to, be here and to be able to share. We're talking about exploring macadamia nut farming, which is really cool. I hope that you'll learn as much as I will from it. And then I have 3 guests coming through. I have Lauren Strieber, who has been on these sessions before with me on Gather to Grow when we were still on X. She is from Amarentia Sweet Dragon Fruit Estate and Nursery. Really amazing woman, doing amazing things in agriculture. Just to explain some of how this works, we do this weekly. It's called Gather to Grow. We're just here to learn from each other, to share information. So if you perhaps are familiar with this commodity and you'd like to share some of your experience with it, our other guest, who also farms with macadamia and vegetables in Mpumalanga. Her name is Tolile. She was actually one of the Soil Sisters for this year's program.
Hi, Dawn.
How are you?
Fine, and you?
Doing well. Thank you. Can't
Good.
complain. Thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
Maybe you can just start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your work within the agricultural space, more about your nursery, your farming experience. I'd love to just start with that.
Thanks, Dawn. My children now on the farm are 4th generation. They are nearly 7 and nearly 10.
Yeah.
So my father's been on the farm since the 50s. And really I inherited my love for plants from not only my father, but also from my mother and from my grandparents. The farm here is a legacy, and it's not a huge farm. I mean, we're small compared to a lot of the big farms out there, but it's very well established.
Yes.
And what's particularly exciting about this year is that it's actually our 50th year, 50, so it's our golden anniversary of producing macadamia trees.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's so amazing.
Yeah,
Wow.
so that's specifically the macadamia nursery. The farming enterprise has been a bit longer than that, but that's specifically the nursery, which is quite a big milestone for us this year.
Congratulations, 50 years. That's absolutely amazing. Maybe you can kick us off by just kind of explaining what are the key factors that make macadamia nut farming an attractive agricultural venture to go into.
Purely having a look at the adaptability of the tree to soil types makes it quite attractive. And in terms of the product, income, when you're looking at an income per hectare compared to any other crop, even though we are experiencing a bit of a down in the market at the moment, it's still a really, really good choice for total per income hectare. And in terms of the product, what's so amazing about macadamia nuts is that unlike fresh produce, it's not perishable. It is, but if it's kept in cold storage, you can keep your nuts for quite a long time. So you're not under this immense pressure to harvest and sell, which in the current market is a good and a bad thing. But if you're the farmer and you want to save and try and sell all your nuts, it's a good thing. But it's a fairly adaptable tree. Look, it's not like any commercial crop. It's not particularly cheap to develop. If you're going to do it properly and do it commercially, you have to put in the foundational work with building a house. So that setup cost is there, but the long-term gain is worth it.
No, definitely. I think that's a lot of the response that I get from people within the specific, industry focusing on macadamia. They say that it's very capital intensive, but in the long run, you will get the return on it. Let's go into the nitty-gritties of the hands-on farming aspects of it. So maybe you can talk us through what the optimal climate and soil conditions are, or what are the requirements in terms of that for a successful macadamia nut farm. Maybe you can just continue with that question, Lauren.
So, I mean, essentially, it's a subtropical fruit, a subtropical tree. But like I said, it's actually fairly adaptable to many different soil types, which makes it really attractive. One really important thing to note is that, well, there's many important things to note. You need to be frost-free. Look, they can
Yeah.
tolerate a little bit of frost in their early years, but you have to really get them through that. You'd have to protect them from year 1 through to about year 4. So it's
Okay.
possible for them to tolerate a little bit of light frost, but heavy frost, it's an absolute no-go. And you also don't want very high temperatures exceeding sort of around 40 degrees. Another important thing to note is that you need healthy rainfall, about 1,000 mils a year. You can do with less, but then you have to have supplementary water. So a big consideration is, where is the water coming from? Do you have access to river water or a dam or river water? You know, and that can be worked out. It can be fine-tuned, and with an irrigation specialist, you can work out exactly how much water you need. But roughly, you need between 500 to 800,000 cubic meters of water per hectare per year. So it's a lot of rain. It's a lot of water. But it is fairly adaptable to many soil types. If you've got soil types that are leached of organic matter or aren't inherently very nutritious, then you will have to look at doing supplementary composted organic matter. But it's quite easy. It's actually amazing. I've seen macadamias growing in sandy soils. I've seen them growing in fairly rocky soils. You need to make sure that there's a good amount of drainage in the soil. So it can't be in a marshy area where there's no free draining, and it can't be too high a clay content, because then also the soil area is not going to drain too well.
No, thanks for that. Very clear detail with your response to that question. And I would like to get Jean to just maybe do a quick introduction. Maybe just a bit about you for those that might not know you. I know your story. I've been on your farm, and you're one of like the coolest farmers I know. You know, very driven towards success and making that, you know, success open to all. You know, you really have that mindset. Listen, we can do this. So if you could just tell us a little bit about you, more about where your journey started very briefly, and then we'll continue on from there. Thanks, Jean.
Yeah, my name is Jean Lekanya, agripreneur based in Louis-Trichardt or Macadamia up in Venda. My journey started 16, 17 years back, where I started farming with 2.5 hectares of macadamia. Slowly started learning about growing macadamia, started expanding as well. And as we talk, we sit just well shy of 100 hectares planted on the ground. So yes, everything I learned about macadamias has really been through trial and error, but mostly, you know, engaging with the neighbors, learning what's going on, best varieties, what's suitable, where and why, also driven by the market. So yes, that's really how my journey and how I started macadamias and where I am today.
You downplay it a lot, but your journey's been amazing. For those that might not, you know about him and want to know more, you can go over to Food from Zanzi. We've done articles. Thank you so much for sharing your story, and just, you know, talking a bit about, you know, how your journey has been. And I think maybe we can just get right into it with the technical aspects. So maybe you can comment on, you know, if there's something that you'd like to add in terms of the conditions, the ideal conditions for macadamia nut farming. And then also if you could outline the essential steps in establishing a macadamia nut orchard, from site preparation to planting. Just run us through that.
What I've learned through the years is, you know, land preparation really is critical. I've seen orchard blocks that have been planted on minimal land prep, and it may be easy to think you can just plant the tree and, you know, dig a hole, plant the tree, give it water, give it food. But, you know, that land, it won't grow as compared to where land is properly deep ripped. You know, understanding that it's a bit expensive, it's a bit costly, but I always encourage farmers that are starting the business really to rather do it smaller, but do it properly. You know, don't aim for the 10 hectares, rather aim for 5, but then you do your land prep, because that's really the foundation of, you know, setting up your tree for success. You know, so you know, do your land clearing properly, get your bulldozers in. You know, the recommendations, if the agronomists say to, you know, do cross rip, do it cross rip, you know, burn the diesel, make the investment. If your agronomist or the people you consult with, you know, propose that you do it on ridges, depending on your soil, do it on ridges, then I think, you know, over time you'll make your money back. But, you know, set the tree up, give it the best possibilities or chances it has, because you only get to plant it once. Then you just have to live with the tree for the next 30 years, you know, so that's really a good investment to make. You know, do your soil sampling, get your limes into the grounds, just have that properly done. Make sure that you've done the 10 out of 10 in excellence. And, by the time you plant your trees, get your irrigations right. The time you plant the tree, it's really, you're just setting up the tree for success. So that's really where I always try and emphasize, because I've seen farmers really that, farmers try to dodge that because it's a bit expensive, and a lot of people want to go for the scale. I've planted X amount of trees, and that doesn't work like that. Rather plant a smaller hectareage, but do your land preparation, your setup in excellence. Then those trees, they'll just catch up over time. That's really my advice.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, don't try to cut costs in the beginning. Lauren, do you kind of agree with that, what Jean is saying in terms of that?
He's 100% correct. And that's always what I say to farmers. It's your foundation. It would be like building a house without a foundation. You just cannot skip that step. He's so right. Okay.
Let's talk about the main challenges and considerations when establishing a macadamia nut tree, the type of varieties that are available. What are the most common in South Africa or Africa, if we can just go through that? If I'm starting out and I want to kind of diversify with this specific commodity, what do I need to understand?
The golden question, hey Dawn, that's what everybody wants to know. And to a degree, it's very climatic and regional dependent, but at the same time, there isn't a lot of data in South Africa. There's data, but there's not vast data in terms of a known recipe in this area. This is exactly what you should plant. It's obviously it's going on data that's coming from processes, like Jean said, spending time with your neighbors, spending time with your fellow macadamia community and making that call on your own. There are some cultivars that are known to perform really well, and then you would always go on. But, most commonly planted, and at the moment there's not a lot of planting going on with, not a lot of macadamia development going on. I mean, 2, 3, 4 years ago, we had 3 to 4 year waiting lists in our nursery for macadamia trees. And at the moment we've got excess trees. So we are experiencing a decline in the market, which I know we'll get to. But it's difficult to speak to what is being planted a lot at the moment because a lot's not being planted at the moment. But I suppose if you had to look at the most recent, it would be A4 is a very popular cultivar. It's known for producing a very large nut, a very whole nut when it cracks. So you get very high kernel recovery, meaning you don't lose a lot to the shell when it's cracked. And it also produces a big size, which fetches a premium. So that's smart agriculture because you want to get a high return on your investment. But it also has its limitations. So really, you're aiming for a good spread. Beaumont is the most widely spread in the country. It's lost a little bit of favor. It's been a bit inconsistent in more recent years. But at the same time, it withstands a lot of different climates. And in a certain percentage can be a really safe bet. And then very climatically dependent, 816 can perform like a machine, as can Nalmac 2, as can 814, as can 842 and 849. That would be in very high heat-stressed areas it performs really well, but in other areas it wouldn't perform well at all. So really one has to look at their site. Where am I located? What's my climate? What's my altitude plays a very big role in that. So how high you are. Whether you're on sea level or whether, like here, we're at about 1,000 meters. We're actually a bit high for macadamias in general, but you would have to take that into consideration. And I'm sure Jean's got some great information to add from his area as well.
Now, Jean, maybe you can also just talk about your experience so far and maybe some general advice that you'd like to share.
Yeah. In the years and experience we have in the business, or I have in the business, I think it was really what was the flavor of the month, and that's really where we made mistakes 15 years later, but not knowing where the market will be going. But I think for that farmer that wants to start today, my biggest advice is start in the business end of macadamia. Ask who's paying you the money. If the factory is paying you the money, then ask the factories these kind of questions. Where do you send your nuts to? What are they looking for? What are they paying? Who's paying the quickest? What are the reasons? So you start in the back end, probing where you'll supply. The factories tend to have a lot of information, and as well as are guided by the market as, where are things going? What are the customers saying? What do they want more and what do they want less? I think you sort of have an idea as to, because it's also a long-term crop. I mean, they also forecast a bit to where their own markets or where their own businesses or where they're selling the macadamias. And when you bring it back, you then end up with a certain cultivars, your Nalmac 2s. again, your A4s, your 816s. I mean, we're all the way in the north, and that's the kind of stuff that seems to be working for us. That's also paying a better premium or a better value compared to your Beaumonts and all that kind of stuff. So I'd say, take guidance from the person that will be paying you or your nearest factory, because chances are that's the person you will be supplying. And, just assemble that information, do that research, go to your nurseries, ask them what are customers buying from them, what's selling the most from the nurseries, and ask them why is it happening like that. All of that research really will lead you to certain conclusion that will give you a more guided response or an action plan to how you will then be able to implement on your orchard, on your farm.
What I'm hearing you saying that there's not that much research, but you kind of have to do that in your own area, and then use that to your advantage and understand that that's where you need to start. So thanks for that clarity. Our other guest is also here, Kolile. She's one of our hashtag Soil Sisters as part of the Koteva program, woman farmer doing macadamia. I love to balance the scales with making it as inclusive as possible. So I'm hoping she can also join us just to talk a little bit about her experience. But in the meantime, let's talk about the life cycle of a macadamia nut tree, approximate timeline for reaching nut-bearing maturity. If you can just talk us through that. And I'm going to go back to Lauren for that one. Thanks, Lauren.
So there is some variability depending on cultivars. But if you want to look at a bit of an average, I mean, you can get a few nuts on a 2, 3, or 4-year-old tree. And it's amazing to see sometimes, and some cultivars are really precocious, and you can see a lot of nuts quite early on. It can be so exciting and so rewarding. But when you're looking at enough production to start earning you a decent income and maybe even start breaking even on your running costs, you're looking at about year 6 or 7, maybe even 8, depending on the cultivar, and really paying back what you've invested from day one. You're looking at about year 8 or 9, depending on the cultivar. And then you're in full production from about year, again, cultivar dependent, year 9, 10, up to about year 15. And then your life cycle of a tree is quite long. You can keep it producing well if you do the correct maintenance in field, especially with your pruning. Like Jean said, you've planted your tree, it's going to be with you for a good 30 years. We've got some trees on the farm here that are older than 30 years. So that's also quite amazing when you think about how long term it is.
I know, definitely. I'm looking at the timelines, and farmers, they want money fast.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. But I think with this specific commodity, it takes time. But when it does, it's there, and you do get your return. What does one kind of do in the meantime? Do you diversify doing other things? Is there other ways that you can kind of try to make money easier? I don't know if I'm making sense at all.
Some people do.
But I just kind of want to,
Yeah, some people interplant with cash crops in between lines. It's possible. If you're very hands-on and you're on a grassroots level, you can definitely manage something like that.
Okay, cool. Jean, and then just in terms of your returns and how you've thought about it in terms of your business and how it's set up with macadamia specifically, what advice would you give to other farmers looking to get into this and develop within the space?
Patience is really the name of the game. I get to have conversations with a lot of farmers in the short-term space, short-term vegetable production, long-term macadamias. And, there's always a plus that, there's wins here, there's wins there. But, overall, I feel with macadamia, with any long-term crop, macadamia can also be a very forgiving crop. If you mess up one year, you don't spray on time, you just have a bad yield, a bad crop, you can always go back and have another chance to do it next year. With the guys involved in short-term crops, you put on you lay down a large investment towards a cabbage or a tomato project. One disease hits you the season, and then you just suffer huge losses. That's really about it's macadamia. You get to hedge better over the term. So that's really the kind of advice I would give. Monocropping is kind of becoming more and more difficult. I think macadamia farmers are pressurized currently because of the price and the markets and the volatility thereof. But 4 years back, it was a different conversations. Farmers were laughing all the way to the bank. But as in any business, it does hit a dip. But I also believe firmly that the price will stabilize. Perhaps not get the prices we got, but then it will even out moving forward. So there's new things that are happening out there. Coffee, for example, it's something that's slowly but gradually being introduced into orchards. If you've got the right growing conditions, if you've got 3-year-old, 4-year trees that can be a mother to the coffee plant, perhaps it's another form of earning. So there's all these kind of possibilities you can create. But I think, when we substitute, there's always caution to farmers that it's a good thing to intercrop. But we've also seen where the intercrop takes over the macadamias, because then you start focusing so much time onto your cabbage and all of these things, then you start neglecting the macadamia because you need tomorrow's money. You need to buy fertilizers. You need to pay the bills. I've seen it real time happening where you the macadamias are there, but all of a sudden you're chasing the tomato money and the cabbage money. You tend to forget that you actually have your core business is the macadamia. So that's really one piece of advice, that if you do go into intercropping, never forget what your core business is, because you lose a day, you lose a month, you're juggling money around. The cabbages they need fertilizer tomorrow. You might make a decision to delay the program for the macadamias because you want a result within 60 days. But guess what? You're still going to pay for the mistake, whether you like it or not. So it's really well-structured decisions. The budgets have to be set out for all these plans and executions. But do not forget what your core business is, which is the macadamias.
I think that's great advice, and I don't think enough people actually follow it. So thanks for just reminding us about it again, Jean. So I'm going to talk about pests and diseases. What are the common pests and diseases? What are the threats for macadamia nut farmers? What should they be vigilant about, and how can it be managed? Lauren, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll be quite brief with this one, Dawn. The pests are quite plentiful. When a specific crop grows in numbers like macadamias have, the pressure mounts, and without enough sort of biodiversity in a highly densely populated macadamia region, you really do have to manage it properly, and it can catch you off guard. Even a seasoned farmer can get caught off guard, even if you scout, even if you spray. But the big culprit at the moment, the big culprit is stink bug, and it can cause either very early damage or very late damage. And it means that when your nuts get to the factory and they find, once opening some of your nuts, they'll do a sampling, you've got a lot of stink bug damage, they just won't accept your products. They accept damage at a certain threshold. So that takes quite intensive management. And then thrip is also a nasty one that comes in as soon as it starts getting hot, and especially after you've had the first rains. It doesn't really damage the nuts per se, but it causes damage to your trees, which you obviously don't want, because your leaf is your factory of the tree. So if the thrip is damaging the leaf, then it's causing problems to the all over general tree health. But it's really at the forefront of the macadamia industry at the moment to find alternatives, because also this heavy use of chemicals is not sustainable. So there's a lot of work being done around integrated pest management. They're looking at wasps at the moment that you can release into your orchard, which actually predate on the pests, the various pests. So there's a lot of work being done, but the sort of catch-22 with that is that you can't practice integrated pest management in isolation. If you'd practice it, your neighbors everyone in the area basically has to jump on board, because if you're not spraying and you're releasing a beneficial pest and your neighbor sprays, there's a risk that he'll, spray all of your beneficials dead, really. So it's quite a tough one, but I think our industry is mature and it's advanced enough that they will find solutions. There's a lot of money being spent on research and development, and we hope that we can move away from heavy chemical use and find more sustainable ways to control the pests. But it is a problem. It's something you need to be aware of.
No, definitely. I think the sustainable practices through all agricultural commodities is really taking a stronger standpoint, and people are really moving towards that. And I don't know if it's happening fast enough. That's always people like kind of say about it. But maybe you can talk about, Jean, just your experience and how that has been, and how you're managing it from your side, and then we'll go over to the next question. Yeah, thanks.
I agree spot on with the previous comment made that, farmers have to work in unity, because what the farmer next door to you does affects me directly on the other side. We sit in very contrasting kind of times where I can give you a practical example where a farm that we have in Chakuma, where the humidity is good, where the rainfall is good, everything is perfect to suit that sting bug that causes so much damage. And you can spray as much as you want, you can do whatever you wish in that space. But if the biodiversity, if the controlled or the organized farming structures are doing whatever they want, then you end up in trouble. Whereas we've got another farm in Louis Trichardt where we barely even spray anything, but we've got such high fauna and flora and biodiversity in the place. There's enough pests in that area to actually combat the sting bug and all these other things. I feel that, somehow we also need to go back to the way things were done, the way things were. I feel when God created life and agriculture and all of these things, the chemicals and all that stuff was not there, but not to say the pests were not there either. There is a control mechanism naturally that's happening, but I feel people are just really, exploring, imploring all these kind of techniques, and all the same time, we just kill the natural stuff. In our places in Lebubu, you barely see a butterfly flying in all these green, beautiful orchards. That's extremely sad, but just tells you that it's a chemically controlled area because everybody wants to win at all costs. And I feel the time will come, or the time is now, where really we need to sit down and talk about, what are we leaving behind for our children? Are we just farming with chemicals? What happens to all these things around? And that conversation has to be had, and quite urgently.
I'm going to run through some of the last two questions. Let's talk about the post-harvest processing and storage impact, and also the quality of that and market value for macadamia nuts at the moment. I think both of you highlighted that you're not getting that much from the market at the moment. But if we can just talk through that briefly, and then the last question would also just be around, what advice do you have for prospective farmers who want to tap into it? So just what's the current situation, and how do new and developing farmers grow in this if they want to explore it?
Dawn, I'm going to talk a little bit about the market, and then I'm going to have to go, and I'll leave the rest to Jean, if that's okay. Just as I mentioned, we are experiencing a decline, we're down in the market at the moment. For a number of years, the industry was experiencing and enjoying record high prices, and that drove a lot of the developments and a lot of the expansion in the industry. And in about a 2-year period, the South African production basically doubled. So now you've got all this additional product that needs to find a home, and we've got quite sort of set channels to market. You pick, you harvest, you dry, you dehusk and you dry on farm, you send it to the cracking plant, they crack, and they generally would take care of the exporting for you, and you got paid. It was like a dream scenario. But then COVID happened, and China had heavy lockdowns. They were big consumers of the products. There were shipping sagas. There was economical issues globally. And the fact that, as I mentioned, it not being a perishable is actually can also have a slightly negative point, because if it's something perishable and there's pressure on the market, you harvest, you've got to get rid of it. It's either going to get dumped or it's going to be sold for very little. Whereas now there's this added pressure of everyone holding onto their stock. Starting a new season with rollover stock is not good for the market either. So there were multiple factors that drove us to this point. And in the last 2 years, the general price, that we've experienced on farm is down about 40%. It's quite a big difference. But when you look at that, compared to other crops. And like I said, income per hectare, it's still a good choice. You're still fetching a really nice price for your commodity. And the low prices at the moment are predicted to rise. They're predicted to not get to quite as record high as they used to be, but certainly higher than what we are getting now. So, I keep saying, because a lot of people are a bit scared of macadamias at the moment. They don't want to plant macadamias at the moment because they just hear about doom and gloom in the markets. What I say is that an entire industry can't disappear, and we just have to find new and innovative ways to market it. And that's what's been lacking, because we've relied on these very easy channels. So there's amazing opportunity for a really beautiful product that's also got incredible health benefits. And it makes up such a tiny percentage of the total world nuts basket. If you compare us to almonds and peanuts and all the other crops, we make up less than 2% of nuts that are consumed globally. So that's just a small indication of where the growth can take place.
Definitely, I think that it's not all doom and gloom. You are painting a very realistic picture. Thanks for that. I think Jean had to go. Stanley saying, but I think GMO contributes to all these factors. As much as we're trying to help, he says, nowadays some produce don't grow back after being harvested, like pepper seeds, tomatoes, which can regrow. I hope you learned as much as I did about macadamia nut farming. In the meantime, from my side, have a great rest of the day. I hope that this has encouraged you to maybe think about macadamia nut farming, or it's put you off. Either way, the value is in sharing and contributing. So thanks again, and have a great rest of the day. Bye, everybody.